If you've ever been to a fandom convention or a writers' conference, you know how valuable and entertaining panels can be. But if you've never been to a multiverse convention panel, you have no idea how amazing they truly are. Multiverse has a knack for making virtually any panel into a free-flowing conversation, one that doesn't always stay in the room or stay within its hour. Attendees and panelists alike often continue the conversation well after the panel is officially over. And this year, as Go Indie Now turns the spotlight on the Multiverse Convention with our ongoing series, in addition to our interview sessions, we've also put together a few panels modeling what a multiverse panel is like, in hopes that you get the feeling for what those who have experienced it already know. Once you've been to a multiverse panel, you want them all to be that way.
Hi, folks. Welcome. I'm Paige Christie. I will be your moderator this evening for our lovely panel on You've Got an Idea, Now What? A reminder to everybody here watching and in the panel that this is a multiverse sanctioned event, and so the code of conduct for multiverse does apply. So keep that in mind as we're going. So I'm going to have our panelists introduce ourselves. I'm Paige Christie. I write epic fantasy, and I'm not going to spend much time on me because you're here to see these folks. So Aziza, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So today I am Aziza Sphinx. I actually write under a couple of different names, but today I'll be Aziza Sphinx. I am a techie by trade, but I am a writer by necessity. I have been writing professionally for over 25 years now. I am a hybrid author, so I have been traditionally published as well as small press and then done indie publishing as well. I actually have a couple of courses focusing on things like how to beat writer's block, using your writing as a form of therapy. And I do write across the board. So I do some science fiction, some fantasy, paranormal romance, and then I've got some regular thriller, urban type stuff as well.
Great. Amelia?
Well, I'm Amelia Sides. I also write under the name Grace Reed. I write fantasy, sci-fi, alternate history, game lit, and science fiction romance. So I'm also kind of across the board. I am mostly self-published, but I do have a 5-book series that will be coming out, I believe, next year under Gold Dust.
Great. Waylon?
I write under the name Waylon Smith, and continuing the trend of the panel, I call myself pan-authorial because it's funnier than multi-genre and it generally makes people laugh. Between novels and short stories, I think I've hit almost every genre at least once, between this name and another one that I'm not going to mention here. And general panel money. If you've got a show with a panel on it, anything to do with writing, I will probably come be at your panel.
Awesome. Well, we're going to get right to it. So this is about ideas and what do you do with them when you have them? So for you guys, and I'm going to start with Waylon and work back. What constitutes for you an idea that's worthy of turning into a story? Are there any specific elements that really catch you on a regular basis? Are you character driven? Are you plot driven? Do you get a scene in your head? What makes you know that idea is something you're going to spend time on?
Pretty much all of those at different points. I don't have a consistent process because my brain just does not work that way, which is why I keep changing genres probably. It's generally one of two things for me if I'm going to pursue an idea or not. It's either when it hits really strong and I'm like, oh, that's really good. Or if I'm not sure about it, since I'm always juggling so many projects, I write it down and take a few notes and I leave it alone for a little while. And then if it comes back to me, I'm like, okay, I got to do something with this. One of my favorite things I ever wrote is a novella that started because I had a phrase that kept bouncing in my head. It would not leave me alone. And then the phrase turned into 2. I was like, okay, I got to go somewhere with this.
Yep. Amelia?
I generally start with a character. And then my brain just starts spinning of how can I make this character have a very bad day? And what kind of conflicts would this character be put in? And I think that's also why I jump genres, is because sometimes the genre doesn't fit the conflict, and so you have to flip it so that it works. And that's how I wound up first starting writing alternate history, because I had a random character that was a World War I soldier coming back from the war, and I wanted to write that. I wanted to write the soldier coming back from the war, and once I had it in my head. So
and this evening as Aziza.
So for me, I actually don't have a choice. I do as I'm told. So I'm very much have my characters, whoever decides that they want to talk to me at that time, they are very clear. You know, it'll be that repeating same sentence again and again until it's like, okay, do you want to eat? Do you want to be able to go to work? Do you want to function? If you do, then you might want to acknowledge me and write my story. So I very much do as I'm told. In most cases, my characters will give me a bit or piece of their story. Most times it starts with the end, so I know kind of what their soul is, kind of where they want me to go with this. And then the fun part is, okay, now you have to figure out how to get there. So they'll give me little bits and pieces here and there, as far as what they're going to go through. And I do kind of do that whole, okay, now how do I make this worse? Like, yeah, okay, you have a nice little life going on. Now, how do I make this worse? But ultimately, I very much, my characters tell me who they are. They tell me what their stories are. And I am but the scribe.
Oh, I love it. It's so interesting how many of us work that way, that we feel like that we're just telling their story and we don't have a choice in how it goes. And interesting that you start with the end. I have a friend who reads that way, starts with the end, and then because figuring out what the end is not as important to her as figuring out how to get there. So it's interesting because people read that way too, which I did not know. I found that odd. So how many people here are the terms plotter, pantser, plancer? Do you plan your stories out? Do they come to you full fold? Is it a little of both? Do you not know what the heck is going on until you sit down to write? Amelia, why don't we start with you?
I would say a little of both. Most of the time, I start with a single scene and work my way out. But most of the time, it's also not the beginning of the novel. So at some point, I have to start plotting it out. Occasionally, I will actually plot from the beginning. It really just depends on the story. I managed to blow the minds of one of my writers groups when I showed them my Scrapple plotted out list of the plot lines of 5 different novels across the entire series and how the timeline intersects all the novels, because I had different characters who were the main character in each book, and I had to figure out how they fell in the timeline while a massive galactic war was going on. So,
is there a tool that you use for that? I mean, I'm a big fan of Aeon Timeline, but
I tried Aeon. It drove me insane. That one has a big learning curve.
Yeah.
I use Scapple. It's actually a Scrivener product. I believe it's for Mac. I don't know if it is for HP or not. Windows.
Wow.
But
making notes for myself.
Yeah, it's basically a massive what do you call those things? It's like a interconnected whiteboard where you have arrows going everywhere.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like one of those mind map things?
Yes.
Well, now I'm interested. I wish it was
basically a big flow chart, which is the word I was trying to find. Yes.
All right. And Aziza, what about you?
So I am 98% a pantser. I have one set of characters who are adamant that I will outline any of their books, period, in the story. And so I, again, yield to whatever they tell me I need to do for their stories. But pretty much everything else, at least when I start writing, I start out as just pantsing it. So whatever they're giving me, whatever I'm channeling at that time, that's what ends up on the page. It can also vary, like once I get a good idea or get good, probably 10 or 15 chapters, I also don't write in order. So, they may give me chapter 3 before they give me, chapter 1 or what have you. And so just kind of writing things out uh, is usually what happens. But once I get into a certain part of the story, if I feel like they're going quiet on me and I can't progress, I'll actually then go to plotting. So I'll go kind of then outline what I already have and then see, they've given me, it's a whole bunch of information here that I'm missing. And it gives me opportunity then to kind of plan it out, to go look for, if I need to look for resources, if I need to kind of figure out more in depth what the setting is, or kind of, what the time period is. So clothing styles and those sort of things. So while I'll start out as definitely a pantser, it can progress to being plants or kind of in between that process.
Glad I'm not the only one who doesn't write in order.
Whatever you want, whatever they want to tell me, that's what I put. And I'll use Scrivener to keep up with that. I like the fact that it has the little note cards. You can just kind of grab a chapter and put it wherever it belongs.
Yep. Scrivener changed my life, but maybe we can get into that a little later about tools. Waylon, what about you?
I used to try and outline because people kept telling me that's how you're supposed to write. And my characters kept patting me on the head and saying, okay, that's cute, and doing whatever they want to do anyway. So the compromise that I've arrived at with my characters, and this is why people think writers are even crazier than we are, is I've developed what I call the landmark system. I'm like, look, okay, this has to happen, and this has to happen. How we get there, go nuts. But these couple of things need to happen. And in general, that seems to work pretty well. And then part of the process between first and second draft is going back through and making sure that all that actually works. Mm-hmm. And yes, the corkboard on Scrivener is a wonderful thing. I use mine mostly, which is nowhere near the full potential of the program, I got to admit. But I love it for character name, physical description, family names, job, trying to avoid the whole they've suddenly changed eye color like 4 times throughout the story kind of thing.
Yeah, unless they're supposed to, that's not a good look.
No.
Yeah. So how do you know if the idea that's popped into your head, do you usually know, or do you figure out along the way whether it's a poem, a short story, a novel, even a series? At what point do you figure that out, or do you have an idea before you start writing? Waylon?
Well, the last time I wrote a poem was in high school trying to get a girl to go out with me, and it didn't work. So I've pretty much given up on poetry. For the rest of it, I sort of get the idea and take a bunch of notes on it and then just start writing. And sometimes it's a short story, and sometimes it turns into a novel. And sometimes I write a short story for a particular anthology, but then I go back and revisit that world and turn that into a novel. Mm-hmm. Again, I don't have any hard and fast rules. It just sort of stuff happens and I'm along for the ride, like pretty much like Aziza said. But yeah, if the idea hits really hard, then I pursue it. And usually if it's going to strike me that hard, it's usually a novel, but there's exceptions to everything.
Mm-hmm. Amelia?
I'm fairly the same. I do write poetry, but my poems tend to be fairly short. And so if I'm working on something with a character in it, then it's either going to be a short story or a novel. I only really plan out series after I've got to like book 2 or 3 at that point. And yeah. Most of the time, I don't realize it's going to be a longer series until you're like, yeah, we're at 50,000 words and still going. So, yeah.
Whoops.
Exactly.
Aziza?
So for me, it depends. Again, because my characters kind of tell me what the story is. Usually how they present it to me from the start, I can tell, like if it's lines that rhyme, typically it's going to be some sort of poem, even if it's not like the standard, layout of one. It'll probably be something shorter. Most of what I write tends to be novels. It's just that I have that kind of feeling that they have a whole lot to tell me. I have one work that I keep trying to make a novel, and I keep trying to make a short story. And I've always been told when I talk to people about it, that this really should be a screenplay. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know how to do that. And I really have no desire to write that. So it every once in a while, it pops back up, but typically it gets pushed to the side. So there, even with that, is some struggle with defining, wow, in my head, I may want it to be one type of story. My characters are like, yeah, that's really not what that is. And, we're going to let you play with this for a little while, but I'm sure eventually at some point they're going to be like, okay, we're here. You need to figure this out, even if you need to kind of just write it as an outline or what have you to give to somebody to help you do the screenplay, layout and version of it. But for the most part, I know when a story is going to be a novel. And in most cases, I know when it's going to be a standalone. And unless I have people who are constantly hounding me and pushing me to do more than one, it will be a standalone. It's just kind of how my characters work.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that's kind of come to mind as we've been talking about all this is it feels like everybody here is kind of a seat of your pants writer. So, but I know for some people, what comes to mind when they love world building in speculative fiction. And that, for some people, that's where the idea goes. The idea goes, I have to create this world. I have to create this world. I have to create this world. And I've met too many writers who are starting off who spend so much time creating the world that they never tell a story in the world. And I've heard it said from a couple of different people that writer's block is the fear that you're not good enough to tell the story you want to tell or need to tell in some people's cases. So any advice or thoughts on, have you ever dealt with that when you were starting off? Did you ever deal with getting caught up in the minutia to the point where you weren't telling a tale? And if that has happened or you have thoughts about it, what are some tips and tricks you would recommend to get people actually writing the story?
So I don't do writer's block. I call it writer's avoidance. Sometimes the terminology itself can be triggering for people. So writer's avoidance, and I actually have a whole course about that too. But for me, if it's something that can be experienced in real life, putting myself in those shoes. So, I have some characters who have some really non-typical for a woman type of jobs. And so actually, they tell you if you're going to look for a job in an industry, go sit with people who work in that industry. And so sometimes if you can put yourself physically in those situations, you can kind of you start to then feel what your characters will feel. So if you're stuck on kind of who your character is, a good way of dealing with that. Now, I'm not advocating doing anything illegal. People are bank robbers, don't go rob any banks or anything like that. But if it's like a couple of my characters are racers, so I learned how to race. I drove race cars. And so, getting that full experience. If you're trying to do nature, go out to the botanical gardens in your local area, or, go out to a pond or something. And then even with that, just kind of sit with, now I'm here as my character. What could be going on with my character right now? Be observant of what's going around. And sometimes that will trigger, oh, well, somebody random could walk up to them, or they could be sitting here and watching some kids playing. And, what would happen if a giant monster just happens to come up out of this lake, and those types of things. So being able to physically experience something that your character could be experienced could be a good way to trigger kind of some thought processes and progress you through your story.
Amelia?
I hate to say it, what was the original question?
For folks that are new to this, not knowing how to start with their idea, maybe getting caught in world building or caught in one specific part of a story that's in their head without actually getting to the point where they feel like they can get into the tale.
I don't know if I actually struggle with that or not. I world build as I go most of the time. If I don't need it, I tend to not write it. I have known other people that do that, and to me it is an avoidance tactic kind of, because I've met people who have the Bible that is their entire story, but they have not written anything for the story. And I'm most of the time writing and I go, okay, I need to remember that that person's eyes are blue when we put that in the story Bible. But I mean, I'm building the worldcraft and character details in as I go most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I personally have an issue with like overbuilding.
Okay. Waylon, what about you?
I don't really get writer's block either, like Aziza said. The closest I've come to that is occasionally I get jammed up in a scene. And if I really can't make the scene go anywhere, I will either go for a walk or I'll set a timer and play like an hour's worth of whatever video game I'm currently obsessing over. And then I usually find by the time I come back from that, whatever it is has popped loose and I'm good to go. As far as the world building thing, I've never had that problem. I was talking with a friend of mine who was doing that at one point, and they were so frustrated. And they were like, please, anything. And I finally like, okay, look, this is going to sound stupid, but hear me out. You're stuck in your world building. Well, worlds are made out of people. So pick a person from your world and start writing something. And if that ends up having nothing to do with your novel later on, you've got like a related short story that you can use for something else later. Because unless you're in the really nice position of being under contract with a deadline, which means you're already going to get paid for your book, and most of us don't start off that way, take all the time you need to make it work the right way. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with just jumping on a part of it. And if it doesn't work out later, you've at least gotten some sort of a flow going.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and Aziza mentioned that she's got an idea that keeps coming back around, but it hasn't found a form yet. And I know that has happened to me. I mean, the series that I'm best known for was the basic kernel of it rattled around in my head for a decade before I figured out how to tell the story and what it needed to be. And so I think that it's important for people to know that you can have many, many ideas. What do they call them? Plot bunnies?
Yes.
Ideas are just exploding like baby bunnies everywhere. You can have many, many ideas, and it's okay not to have them all completed right now. Some people are capable of working on 6 or 7 things at once, and jumping between characters and worlds, and some people aren't. And I think that there's some sort of stigma that can go either way. Either this person doesn't appear to be able to focus, or this person, or oh my God, I can't work on so many things at once, and people feel bad one way or the other. Yeah. It's like we're always as authors, when we're starting out, I think going, oh, this person's doing that, I wish I could do that. So how do you find confidence in yourself to know that what you're working on is worthy of being worked on because it's important to you? Are any tips or tricks for building confidence that your ideas and stories have value?
The phrase thing that I mentioned earlier, I actually bounced it off somebody else because, like, okay, I think this sounds cool, but I want an outside opinion. And it was, what do you do when a dream dies and it doesn't have the grace to take you with it? Ooh. And that turned into what I think is my favorite novella, which bizarrely a friend of mine, after he read it, described as a post-apocalypse Arthurian novel, because it's 2 nights the morning after the Battle of Camelot. So Camelot's gone, Arthur has fallen, and now what do you do? Because your whole world is gone. Which is not what I started off to do. It was the phrase. But, I mean, really, if you've got an idea that's speaking to you, it's probably worth going with it.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't turn out to be a full novel or even a full short story, you've gotten something down, and put it aside, save it somewhere, and then back it up, because always back up your work. But save it somewhere and come back to it later, or maybe it'll start talking to you later on.
Mm-hmm. Amelia, thoughts?
I agree. I mean, if you have a story, try it. I mean, I've had several projects where I started them 10, 15 years ago, and I knew I didn't have the skill to finish it at the time. And so they got shelved. And I have since went back to a couple of them and kept working on them. And one of them is my self-published book. So, I mean, you can shelve something for years and then go back to it. I have one that on the drive back from Dragon Con, we were workshopping books in the car, and we realized my story I've been stuck on for years now has the wrong beginning, and everything I wrote before that is just junk at this point, and I have to totally rewrite it from where I stopped because that's the actual beginning. And sometimes you have to do that. You have to put something in the trunk and think about it for weeks or months or years until you finally figure out how to keep going with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm one of those people that does have 5 different projects going at the same time most of the time anyway, so I'm jumping between projects. I think at some point you do have to just jump off the cliff.
I agree. I think I always in my head have this idea of that I'm a writer. I will always be a writer. I may not always be an author. And so my motivation for writing is kind of tied to that idea. Writing for me is a form of therapy. You know, it's a way really for me to process. You know, it took me a long time to realize that and acknowledge that, and it changed my approach, because I used to be one of those people that, you know, they would say, oh, you have to outline, you know, you should have to write every day, and that was extremely demotivating for me.
Mm-hmm.
And especially because I was doing, you know, what I was told what my characters were giving me. And when I kind of got into that mindset, they stopped talking to me, and it was really frustrating for me. And so when I finally kind of let that go and was like, you know, why am I really doing this? I was able then to realize that most of my stories I'm writing for me. If somebody else happens to enjoy it, somebody else happens to get something from it, then, you know, I'm happy. Even if I publish something, for me is if I can just touch one person. You know, there are people who want this whole, they have this whole idea of they want to share their stories with everybody in the world, and they want everybody to understand, and that's just not why I write. And so I'm okay with if a story has gotten to a place where I think I only have a certain amount of information to complete it, or, you know, to stop where I am, then that's where I'm going to stop. And like everybody else was saying, you know, sometimes you have to shelve things, and typically I'll come back around to them. You know, my first book I wrote cover to cover in 30 days. We'll never do that again, but that's how it was given to me. My most recent release, I started 7 or 8 years ago and didn't finish it until, you know, a couple of years ago. And I was okay with that. And so you have to kind of be okay with what your process is, figure out your process, learn your process. And then, you know, you'll start to realize, hey, I can work on multiples at sometimes. Some people can, some people can't. But, you know, you can be okay with this is not moving forward for me right now. And if I need to kind of step away, then so be it. I can step away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that for so many people, writing is more than I wish to write a book. You know, everybody feels like they've got a book in them, but for the people who have to write, that's a whole other thing. And I think for most people who are really passionate, it's we don't have a choice. You know, and maybe we're not producing right now. I know that I'm not producing a lot right now because I'm in a big life transition, and, you know, my brain's just not firing right now. But that doesn't mean I'm not a writer just because it's not working right now, because I know it's in there and it's going to come back. So my next question is, what was your first, do you remember, and it's probably happened when you were a tiny human, but do you recall your first idea that you had to write down, like when it was in your life that you knew you had to tell this story and you had to type it or put it on paper or scribble it? Do you remember when that was for you, and what that felt like in that moment? And I'll let you guys think about it for a minute if you need to.
Go ahead, Aziza.
I do, and it was actually a piece of nonfiction, if you will. So I was 11, and I had just watched my neighbor. I watched my neighbor's brother carry him out of the house, and he had done something to himself. And that night, like that was really, I think, what triggered my I write because I have to. Because the first thing I wrote at age 11 was my first will, and I actually go back and look at it now, and it's like you think about um, the cycle of life. That I was always kind of a loner kid, but I always liked animals, and so I always looked at that as life and kind of the circular part of it. But from that point on, I was compelled to, I started out with some darker stuff, but I wrote song lyrics for the longest because music was therapy. And so I was able to tell stories through my song lyrics, which then progressed to poetry. And then, I didn't start writing quote unquote full length type works until I was in my mid 20s going on 30. So again, with that whole you're never too late. But sometimes, I think for me, that traumatic event was what triggered me to, I wasn't able to verbalize, or I didn't feel comfortable verbalizing, what I was going through, what was going through my head at that time. But definitely being able to put pen to paper and to get that out. All of my songs are some sort of story, beginning, middle, end. And then, like I said, they progressed on into poetry, which led into the actual novel writing.
That's intense. Thank you for sharing that.
I keep getting told that I used to write stories all the time when I was a really little kid. I do not remember this at all. The one that I think I remember the most, and boy, this is going to sound stupid, but I had to write a history paper for junior high school, and I was so tired of doing reports because teachers assigned a whole bunch of them at once, and this was like my 5th one in a row, and I was so over it. And this was at the time when a now somewhat obscure TV show was on called Voyagers, and I wrote my history report kind of like an episode of Voyagers because no one told me I couldn't do that. And the teacher at least liked that it was different. And I got a decent grade on it, and I got something or other about creativity. And then later on, I heard him talking to somebody else going, I don't know what's wrong with that kid. So,
yeah.
Amelia?
I wrote poetry all through middle and high school. I didn't start writing novels until probably mid-20s. My poetry actually had a teacher calling my parents saying I needed psychological help. So, yeah. And I decided my first book was going to be dedicated to that teacher because she drove me insane. You made a very sarcastic, intellectual loner kid write journals at 8 a.m. in the morning in English class. And you didn't expect me to be very sarcastic about it.
Isn't it interesting how the world gets into us and doesn't let us go, and shapes our stories and why we have to tell them? Yeah, I didn't write my first novel till I was in my mid-40s. So speaking of never too late, nobody saw my writing from the time I was 20, probably 21 till the time I was in my mid-40s, because I had a teacher in college who beat the love of my stories out of me. Yeah. Don't let that happen. Your ideas are valid out there. Your voice is valid. And there are lots of people who you're going to tell you that that's not the case, or that you're the weird kid, writing your episode history picture, or you're the one who's writing your will at 11. All of that shapes you, but don't ever let it stop you. Yeah. I let it stop me for too long as far as sharing my work. I never stopped writing because I was a writer long before I was an author. And I think that's true for most of us. So we talked a little bit about tools. And I know, does everybody here write in Scrivener? I write in Scrivener.
I actually use Dabble. Okay.
I will say that finding the right tool to write in, it sounds crazy, but it changed my life when I discovered Scrivener, because I don't write in order, and I couldn't sit down and put a novel together in Word because, creating 75 different Word files and then figuring out which order they went in was not going to work for me. And I couldn't write in order. So you ever tried to copy and paste one chapter into another in a Word file? Forget it. So Scrivener saved my life. I could color code my characters. I could go into my note cards and say, this one is half done. This one is started. This one, I have no idea what's happening, but I know I need the scene. And it changed my world. I'm also a big fan of these little guys, and I don't go anywhere without a pen and a journal, because you never, ever know when you don't have electricity and you're going to need to write something down. So are there tools that help inspire you, that help make the way you write and the way you get your ideas out easier? Waylon?
I have got the stupidest writing accountability system ever.
Okay.
But it works. On my writing computer, I have a free calendar program. And the calendar program lets you import images. And I am only allowed one of 3 images for each day. There's a green check, a blue bar, and a red X. The green check means I did something writing related. I wrote, I edited, I submitted, I was on a panel, I went to a con. I did something writing related. The blue bar is I legit could not have done writing that day. The day we drive home from Dragon Con, which for us is like supposed to be a 10-hour drive and usually turns into something like 12 or 14, because I-95 is some of Satan's finest work on earth. That's a blue bar, because no, we're not getting writing done. And the red X is I could have written and I screwed around and did other stuff. So you get the red X. And I have come to hate that red X with a passion that is probably not really healthy. So I will go to amazing lengths to keep that red X off my calendar. And I will never say you should adopt this system necessarily. I will say it works for me.
Joe is in love with this concept, I see from the comments here. Amelia, what do you do to trick yourself? What tools do you have?
So I actually have several chronic illnesses, and so I can't always write during the day. I just may not have the energy that day. And so I basically will count myself as writing even if I don't get a word on the page, because I am thinking and plotting stuff out. Mm-hmm. If I'm actively thinking about the character and working on stuff in my head throughout the day, I count that as a writing day. I do schedule writing sprints out through a couple of my writing groups, and we'll do them in the evenings over Google Meet. I'll do those 2 or 3 days a week just to have my butt in a chair working on it. And one of my writing groups has a goal meeting that we do once a week. And we do, what was your self-care task? What was your financial goal? What was your writing goal for the week? Did you do all your housework? And health. So we do one small goal in each category every week. And
I really like that idea. That's kind of
we
cool.
have some weeks where it's, yes, I survived, and none of the goals got met, but we were here, and you get cheered on for that, I mean, mm-hmm. But it's nice to have that mild accountability, I think, so that even when people know you're having a horrible week and all the stuff went wrong and you got 0 writing done, you still have people that know what's going on, and it's okay.
Mm-hmm. So. Aziza?
I'm like you, Paige. I have little notebooks all over the place. So that the idea of kind of always being prepared, even with the phone, like there are folders specific to, every story has its own little folder. So if something comes to me while I'm in the car, turn that voice note on, attach it to that folder. So I'll have it. So I will take advantage of technology, but I also do old school. I have one story or a group of stories, it's probably going to be at least 3 books, and my characters have insisted that I use note cards. So I actually have the larger size note cards, which are very much for the world building part. The smaller white old school note cards are for kind of the plot points or what have you, and then all of that stuff is paper clipped or binded to a legal pad. And so they're forcing me to write their story by hand. And I'm okay with that. the psychologist side of me says that there's a different part of the brain that is triggered when you write by hand. And so knowing, even with writer's block, if I get to a place where I feel like staring at the screen is not helping me, a lot of times if I just go old school with that pen and paper, I'll be able to kind of progress through. And then once I get to a stopping point, yes, it's annoying. Sometimes I retype it in. I do have a couple of voice programs that will transcribe. And so, if it gets to be, 100 pages, I'm probably not going to type 100 pages, but if I have to, I will. But taking advantage of being able to choose between the different mediums definitely helps me progress through the story. And again, sometimes that whole change of how you're doing things is a trigger that will, let you know that everything doesn't have to be done in just Word or just Scrivener. You can utilize all these different formats and, all together still get your story done.
Joe says accountability is king, and he loves crossing things off a list.
It started off as a joke, but one of the more entertaining bits of writing advice I heard years ago was, depending on what type of story you're writing, if you're getting stuck in the middle of it, you throw in either a car chase, an explosion, a sword fight, or a sex scene.
Yeah.
Or combine all four if you're feeling really creative, I guess. But
that would be really creative, and now we all need to go try that.
Exactly.
How do you make this work? How do you make it work?
This is how anthologies are born. But the best writing advice I ever got was from Michael Stackpole at DragonCon.
Oh, he's awesome.
Yeah, he's amazing. But he said one thing. So I'll tell you this about panels, and then I'll get back to this point. When I go to a con or writing panels, or I sit through a bunch of workshops, I'm looking for my writing partners and I are looking for what we call nuggets. You don't have to absorb everything that's being told to you. You have to find the nugget that catches your attention and works for you, and go think about that, go work on that, go write based around that. And the nugget that Michael Stackpole gave me that I have never forgotten is dig a hole. Because sometimes writing is digging a hole. It's just like digging a hole. You just dig and dig and dig and dig and dig, and you end up with this big pile of dirt, and that's what you turn into your sandcastle. But if you don't dig the hole, you don't get the dirt. And I was like, oh, okay, this is hard. I think that's one thing that that people forget too, is that sometimes writing is hard. Sometimes it's really, really easy, and it flows out of you like water. And sometimes it's really hard. So the fact that your idea is coming hard doesn't mean it's not valid. And like you guys were saying, if you need to shelve it and come back to it, that's fine too. So my next thought is, say you've gotten the story down. You're in the now what? Do you have a ritualistic process for editing, or is it different every time? Or, I have a ritual that's pretty much, I print it, I tear it apart by hand. That's my second draft. By the time I type those edits back in, I'm changing it again. And by the time I've typed it back in, I've got a third draft, and I didn't have to rewrite it from the beginning. So that's kind of where I start. It goes from there. But you guys have certain steps that you take when you've reached the end of a project. I guess first, how do you know when you've reached the end of what you're working on? And secondly, how do you go about editing it when you have? I threw two things at you. I'm sorry.
I'll jump in. As far as the ending goes, for me, usually just kind of like feels right, because, like I said, I'm usually making this up as I go, in the words of Indiana Jones. So I don't necessarily have a end point plotted. I have been very, very fortunate in that at the present I have 3 amazing beta readers, and I can send them like a really rough second draft and get a lot of improvement off of that. And then sometimes it's just looking at it. I've got one novel, I have finished the novel completely. First draft is done, and it was an absolutely great idea, and what I wrote did not live up to that idea. And that was like 5 years ago now, maybe, might have been longer. And I have to put that aside, And when I feel like I'm better, or when something else jumps at me, I'll go back to that. But just because you finish something doesn't necessarily mean it needs to go out. The twisted version I heard, because I think it was Amelia said something about shoving it into the trunk. My writing group gets a little dark sometimes, so our version of that is you shove it into the trunk and until it starts banging to get back out.
The undead novel. Amelia, how about you? When do you know you're done, and then what?
How to know I'm done is feeling, if you hit that ending right or not. And generally I'll go back through and give it a reread. And then it gets shelved for like a month. And then at that point you start editing. I'll normally do a quick reread to see if I catch anything blatant at that point. Then it gets printed out. I don't have the best luck with beta readers that actually read my genre. So I'm still working on that. But once I feel like it's gotten polished enough that for what I can do, I then send it off to an editor.
Aziza?
When it gets quiet in my head is, I guess, when my characters have deemed the story done. Unless something goes real left, they actually don't show up in the editing phase. So it pretty much is when they say that I've completed whatever task it is they wanted me to do, then I'll put it away, and it'll be 6 months, it'll be a year, I think, because this is not my primary source of income. Like, and again, I'm a writer. I might not necessarily want to be an author all the time. So I have stacks of stuff that's completed. It's been completed for years, but on a whim, somebody starts talking again and they were like, hey, you remember my story? Then I'll go dig it out. And sometimes, it'll get stuff added to it. Sometimes it's like, okay, let me reread. And as I'm going through kind of the cleanup process, I've got a couple of beta readers that I will hand it off to. And then like everybody else, it goes through the regular professional editing phase. And even with that, once that's done, when I get my edits back, it may sit for another 6 months, year, 2, 3, whatever.
So we have a question in the chat that wants to know, when you reread, do you read it out loud? I'm going to answer first because I don't, because I have a bit of dyslexia, and reading out loud for me is absolutely terrifying. I will have Scrivener read it out loud to me, but I will not read it out loud. But that's my final phase. That is the absolute final thing I do before I put work out into the world. Does anybody else do that auditory check?
I do when I have it on paper. I'm the person of, as I'm figuring out the dialogue, I'm pacing around the house, fully speaking the dialogue for every character and figuring out, does it sound right anyway? So I will go through and read most of the dialogue again, just to double check that it does actually hit correctly.
Aziza?
I do chapter by chapter. The initial pick back up, and I haven't seen this in a while. I'll actually just read it like a regular book, but as I'm going through my personal edit of it, then chapter by chapter, I do either have Scrivener or Word read it out to me. That way I can kind of get the cadence and the punctuation stuff, all of those little pieces. So I do feel like it does on some level help, but that wouldn't definitely not the very first time of trying to get back into a work. That definitely would not be how I would approach it.
Waylon?
I don't really do the reading out loud thing that much. It doesn't help me a lot. I know it helps a lot of people, which is fantastic. Just, nothing works for everybody. The only time that I really do that, if there's a very, very important or a very, very involved conversation between two or more characters, I will read that out loud, because then people are speaking it, and I want to make sure that it sounds right and that it sounds like I meant it to sound. So I've done that on occasion, but as far as like everything in there, that has never really clicked too well for me, but I think that's more a failing on my part than saying the method doesn't work.
Yeah. Only conversations I have with myself where I answer myself. I wish I could say that, but I answer myself all the time. Yeah. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So first, is there anything about processing ideas or follow through on an idea that I haven't hit on that you guys want to say? And then, and then we'll tell everybody like what your latest works are and where we can find you in person and online and things. I want to do that a little early so that, we can really get that thoroughly. I don't like that, oh my God, last minute thing. So any final thoughts on our topic to start?
I'll share a tip that I ran across at one point.
Absolutely.
I always hear about, I had this great idea in the shower, and then by the time I could get somewhere, I lost it. Well, guess what? Dry erase markers right on shower tile.
They have stickies you can buy too. There are whole notebooks that attach to the side of your shower wall with
as long as you keep
paper.
That dry erase stuff out of the direct spray of the water, it'll be there.
Oh yeah, I actually keep a Sharpie in my pen holder and a piece of cardboard on my passenger seat. So if an idea is flying through and I can't get to the phone, I will literally reach over and Sharpie a shorthand of it on the cardboard in the passenger seat, which is probably not the safest thing, but
when this is done, I'll tell you about the idea that I lost, but I want everyone else to go first.
I record stuff. I will use the recording app on my phone, or if I am where I can type, I'll just type an email to myself and send it to myself so that I can pick it back up later. But I also tend to bounce stories. If I get stuck on one story, I will bounce to whatever other story I'm working on that's flowing better at the moment. So,
Aziza?
I think for me, the idea of the first draft is just that, a draft. Be okay with if you feel like you're moving forward in the story, but there's some information missing. Especially if you're like typing this, if you're in Word or Scrivener or something like that, just put some little parentheses with the word, history or develop this more and just highlight it. And that way you don't trap yourself trying to figure out what happens in this one place. If you have enough information to kind of move forward, keep going and be okay with that. And then you can come back after you've gotten the as much of the story out as you feel like you can get out. And you can go back and just scan through the document, find where those little highlighted places are, and fill in those missing details. Even if you don't have all of those details, when you go back, you can say, hey, I need to go do some research on this. So it becomes a process, but you don't get lost in feeling like you have to have everything when you write that first draft. First drafts really are just that, drafts. Get as much out as you can and then go back and fill in the blanks, if you will.
Yeah, there is no shame in putting brackets around something and saying, I will come back to this scene.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I switched. The caps lock button is my friend because I don't even want to go find the highlighter. I'm just caps lock, and then this is stuff that needs to go here. I have no idea what's going to happen, and then I'm back. So yeah, for me, it's caps lock, and I'm looking for blocks of all caps. Oh, we have a question in the chat here. How often are you going back? Are you looking at or going back to ideas that didn't work versus how often do you bury the idea never to be seen again? And are you okay with the funeral? Let me tell you, I have had so many funerals for my words. Let me tell you, sometimes you're like, that was interesting and I'm glad I tried it, but heck no. So I don't know. I think it's 30, 30, 30 in that. There were 3 questions and I'm 30% of each. Something doesn't work. That's okay. I tried it. I had fun with it. So going back to old ideas versus new ideas versus having a funeral for your words.
I mean, some stuff sticks with you and you just keep kind of vaguely thinking about it in the back of your mind. Other ones you find 10 years later and go, why did I write this?
Where did this come from? Did I do that?
Was I having a moment? I mean,
Yeah.
what's going on here?
I would just like to take a moment to tell whoever wrote this that they have a wonderful turn of phrase, because that is brilliantly written as a question. I don't think I've ever had a funeral for an idea.
I kind of like the idea, though.
I do. It's a phenomenal idea. I should maybe start doing that.
Yes.
As I said,
Like
I'll have
having
to-
Resting syntax.
We're
I'll have
giving
to
away
go
the
for
X
five
thing where you
sometimes and go back
start
to,
burning
like,
things.
if I feel my skill level has gotten better. I also have one of the beta readers that I use. One of the reasons I love working with her is she is very insightful, but very, very direct. And one of the most recent things I got back from her, there was an entire conversation between two characters highlight, and the extent of the note next to that was just, "No, you're better than this."
Mm-hmm.
I had to go back and go, okay, this needs some work.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like I said earlier, I've got a novel I put aside years ago that I'm going to go back to eventually, but it did not live up to the original concept of what I came up with. So that's definitely put aside. I think the other thing, for me at least, that's happened with that is it was never my plan, but I've become almost more of an anthology writer than anything else these days. And that means I have a lot of rejected short stories. And if another call comes up for something I haven't managed to sell yet, I will go back and look at that short story and pretty much every time find something or other that needs to get fixed or changed or cleared or expanded on. But I will go back and work on that and then send that out to somewhere new.
Mm-hmm.
I have one that I keep going back to, and it keeps disappearing. Like literally, I have written this same, and it's not the full story. It's probably the first fourth of the story. I have written this story at least 4 times in different formats, and literally, it disappears. I don't know what the deal is with that, but in that case, that's one that I can't let go. And yet I have other stories, or I have parts of stories where I've had beta readers or editors and they're like, yeah, you went left on this, but it never goes away. So those become deleted scenes. Those are
So
things
now,
that, you can kind of play with later on. You use it marketing,
now I want to write a
running
story
joke,
about the
put
disappearing
those up.
story.
It drives me crazy. I'm like,
Oh, I'm sure.
I've sent it to people and they're like, I don't know where this file went. Like, I looked at this file 2 days ago because I was going to send it back to you. It keeps disappearing.
I have a
But,
disappeared story currently that I don't know where the latest version is. I gave it. I know I have a friend that read it, and I've been rewriting the story for 3 years, and it's like I think I finally have it, and it's gone. Damn it!
I'm like, did I change the character's name? So maybe it's some different names I'm doing search. But I mean, I've even handwritten this story and been through every one of my notebooks. And I'm like, where it keeps disappearing. And so, yes, there are some stories that just stick with you. And then there are stories, I have stories where I'm just like, yeah, that was fun. And okay, we're going to move on to the next thing. And I don't throw them away. They just get put in a file somewhere. And I've had friends who stumble upon this, hey, you remember this? Don't you want to do something with this? And I'm like, no, but then they make me. So here we are.
There's Wayla said something about the stories about disappearing stories. There's a wonderful novel that I'm going to bring up here called "If on a Winter's Night a Traveler" by Italo Calvino. I just go read it. As a writer, just go read it. It's so delightful. So, where can we find you guys? Where can we find your writing? Where can we find you personally? Where can we find you online? Tell us a tale of seeking you out in the world. Aziza, you get to go first.
Okay, well, you can always find me at my website, azizasphinx.com. So it's my name. You can see here on the screen, one word. That's where it'll lead you to my website. And I actually do have a couple of stories on there that are only available via my site. And if you sign up for my newsletter, you get a free story about Cupid. So you get all the dirt. Cupid's not that little cute little cherub that everybody makes him out to be. He has some dirt, and I tell all of the business.
The dirt on Cupid.
The dirt on Cupid. And as well as social media, I'm on Facebook. I'm not on TikTok. I'm getting there. Hadn't gotten there yet, but I'm getting there. But you can definitely find me on Instagram, Facebook, and my books are available pretty much everywhere. Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, like anywhere that books are typically distributed.
Amelia?
My website is ameliasides.com or gracereed.com. I am currently redoing it, so it's a little sparse at the moment, but we're working on it. You can find my books at Amazon, any of the major publishers. They're on, I know the paperbacks are at least out on bookshop.org. For social, I am on Facebook. I'm on, oh, my brain went dead. Substack, and Threads. Most of the other ones, I just don't have time to have that many socials going at the same time. The next event I'm going to be at is Atlanta Comic Con. And of course, I'll be at Multiverse this year.
Waylon?
My website is waylandsmithauthor.com, which is constantly a work in progress. So I'm adding and changing and more things as I go, because I've also discovered that I'm a writer and not, in fact, a website designer. I am some version of Wayland Smith on Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky. I have an Instagram account that I remember every once in a while and try and throw something on there, but I got to be honest, I'm not great at updating that one. I write reviews for comic book-based TV shows, movies, and books on a site called comicbookclog.com. I didn't name it. I just work there. I do online panels for Continual a lot. I retired at the end of December, and apparently a lot of people found this out. So in no particular order for the rest of the year, and I'm going to forget something, I'm at LibertyCon, Congregate, Multiverse, DragonCon, PhilCon.
Good Lord.
I think I'm forgetting one or two. And I'm always interested in something else if someone wants to bounce something off me.
Okay. And I'm Paige L. Christie. My website is pagelchristie.net because my .com got hacked and it's gone. I have a Blue Sky, but I haven't figured that out yet because I never liked Twitter, so why would I like Blue Sky? Facebook, Instagram. I've started a Substack where weirdly I am writing nonfiction. Who knew? I will be at Congregate. I will be at DragonCon. I will be at Multiverse. Multiverse is my favorite event of the year since the day it started. So I am a shameless plugger of Multiverse and all things Multiverse. So I hope that you come join us out there online and find our books and come to Multiverse and track us down there. And come to the dance party and karaoke and all the fun things that happen there and all the writing panels and listen to us blather on some more. We're quite fun. So, and I get to say the magic words, even though this is a Multiverse panel. I get to say, it's always time to go ND now.